something's going on and I need to take advantage of this momentum because, there's a quote I like to say is never turn your back on momentum because it's really hard to get. It's like catching fire and lightning in a bottle, basically. And it's like, wait, something's happening here. People would kill for this that actually have events. And they're just like flying to my events. And I don't know what it is, but I'm going to go with it.
In this episode of the Happy Accidents podcast, I sit down with Lucas Bean, CEO of Social Proof, and we talk about the incredible journey and the happy accidents that have brought him to where he is today. Hey there, friends. This is Dennis Geelen, author of the Happy Accidents newsletter and the book, The Accidental Solopreneur. Welcome to another episode of the Happy Accidents podcast, where we dive into true stories of wildly successful people, products, or businesses, all of which can trace their success back to a chance encounter, a serendipitous event, or a fluke invention. In each episode, we unravel the tales of unexpected triumphs and the remarkable journeys that led to their incredible success. I'm on a mission to explore the fascinating world of happy accidents, and I'm thrilled to have you along for the ride. So, why should you tune in? Well, besides the entertainment value of these incredible stories, there's a hidden treasure trove of lessons we can learn from them. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a creative mind, or simply someone who enjoys a good narrative, this podcast is your go-to source for inspiring stories and valuable insights. Get ready for a roller coaster of surprises, a dash of luck, and a sprinkle of wisdom. This is the Happy Accidents podcast, where success meets serendipity. Let's jump into today's adventure. Well, I'm super excited to have this guy on the Happy Accidents podcast today. We have Lucas Bean with us. Welcome, Lucas.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Dennis.
Yeah, I'm just looking at your LinkedIn profile actually right now, and if I scroll back through your work history, just some incredible things you've been a part of. Right now, you're the chief influence officer of your company called Social Proof, and we'll dive into that. But if I go back further, you've been an advisor, a fractional chief company officer at a company called We Connect. You've been a founder of another company called Silicon Beach. You've been the senior vice president of marketing at a company called Hello Music, head of global marketing at Atari, head of marketing at Sony Pictures, another founder venture company called Engage BDR, all the way back. And then the furthest I can go back, I can see you started as a business consultant at Deloitte. So quite a checkered career you've had over the last 15 years or so.
Yeah, it's a interesting dilemma. And also it's like between you and me, a lot of people wonder like how I was able to navigate so many different types of business channels and be successful in them. So most people think that, there's only one career path or one direct way to be successful in business. And I'm kind of I guess the anomaly or a
Mm,
happy accident.
yeah. So take me back to Lucas, around 20 years old. What was your original aspiration? You come out of high school, you're going into post-secondary. What did you envision for yourself at that time?
Well, my first year of college, I was a pilot. We're learning to be a pilot. Yeah. So I had a double
Okay.
major, business management, and I was going to flight school.
Wow.
And I found out the hard way that being a naval aviator wasn't for me because I'm 6'5". And no one really told me as a kid that I can't be I probably wouldn't make the best fighter pilot because I'm so tall.
Hmm.
And I found that out the hard way first year of college. And then after my first year of college, I went to a different school because I was like, wow, this is a very expensive school for me to not becoming a Navy fighter pilot. So in a way, my life kind of changed then and I went to University of Massachusetts at Amherst instead. And from there, I got a bachelor's
Hmm.
degree in marketing and a minor in
Right.
Spanish and things like that. So
So first of all, I've only ever seen you from like the torso up, so I had no idea you were that tall, 6'5". Is it because you'd just be too big for the cockpit? Is that really like 6'5"
A
is just too
couple,
large?
yeah, a couple reasons on that one. That's a good question, by the way. It's not just because I'm too big, but yes, that's definitely one of the problems. The other one is I would call it would be called graying out. You'd black out with amongst G forces at a too low of a G force. So like
Oh,
being a
wow.
fighter pilot, you have to experience like G forces up to like 9 Gs. And they didn't think I could handle it. I've never really been in a centrifuge to actually be able to determine like at what
Mm.
point I would black out, but they just thought 6'5", eventually, it's you're just not you wouldn't make a good pilot basically. And I was just like, oh, that really sucks.
Wow. So how far along were you, sorry, in the process before you kind of had this revelation that, hey, this is probably not going to work for you?
First year of college, yeah, that was it. After the first year of college, I realized, like, I did a bunch of research. I was like, wow, I really cannot really just none of this being a fighter pilot doesn't make sense. And going to school, the whole idea was to go to school for 4 years, then join the Navy and be a fighter
Mm.
pilot. So I'd go into the Navy at like a second lieutenant, an enlisted officer rather than just like a grunt and then have to figure my way out. But yeah, first you
Right,
get a college degree and then you go into the Navy and you're like, you can
right.
become a pilot pretty quick.
So that plan got scrapped.
It did.
Why marketing?
I didn't even know what I wanted to do when I went to UMass Amherst. I was there for like a year, maybe a year and a half, and I was on the internet and I was playing around with the internet. And this is in the 90s too, the late 90s. So like the internet was not that big of a deal, right? And email especially wasn't that big of a deal because I remember having to sign into like a Unix command prompt to like check my email, and everybody was like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm just checking my email." They're like, "What's that?" And I was like, okay. So it was just a strange time because it was literally the crossover between like right when the internet was becoming important enough.
Right, right.
So I guess when I got there, I started messing around on the internet a lot because the first program I ever wrote, I was like 11. The first time I ever was playing with a computer, I think I was like 10 or something like that. So it's like, and then the game, I actually made a game when I was 11 too. Like basically coded a video game. My father like bought me this like how to code, and I made a video game from it. So that was pretty cool. But when it came to the internet, like people just didn't understand it, and I was basically the one who everybody came to when they had something wrong with their computer or something like, hey, I have a program or thing I have to do for class, like, and it has to do with like computers. I'm like, yeah, let me figure it out and show you how to do this a lot faster with code rather than having to do it from scratch. And it was way harder back then because there's no, DIY templates, or there's no code builders where you can just like put together a website really quickly. None of that
Right,
stuff existed back then. So
right, right. But you obviously didn't foresee, the digital marketing landscape and the type of marketing that would, be coming 15, 20 years down the road due to the internet and your love for computer. I'm assuming, I don't want to put words
I
in your mouth,
kind of
but
did. I kind of did. So
mm,
here's what I saw. One of my classes, there was an older professor, but he was kind of like a closeted tech nerd, and he was kind of like explaining to me what he saw of the future. And he was not really talking about like marketing and stuff like that, but I saw websites as being the new storefronts. That's what I saw. So I saw like brick and mortar kind of disappearing. I knew that in like 97, 98. And I remember
mm,
telling my parents, and they were very unhappy with me when I told them, like, hey, I'm going to be, I know you guys want me to be, my mom wanted me to be a doctor. My dad wanted me to be like a lawyer. I was like, I think I'm gonna do online advertising. And they're like, what? So you're gonna be unemployed? And I'm like, no, I really want to focus on like, and I told my mother this, I was very vivid with my explanation. I was like, I want to be working in the Caribbean, working on websites for really big fancy hotels in the Caribbean, and just make a living, and I'll live on a Caribbean island in paradise and just build and maintain websites and make, advertising for these guys, because websites are, a form of advertising, because websites were a lot harder to develop back then.
right, yeah,
And I just happen to be, like I said, I just happen to be good at coding because, or at least coding websites then, because I just found it super interesting. Not that no one showed me
right,
how to do it. I learned myself. So
right.
yeah,
Yeah,
it was
which is
interesting.
where a lot of people back then kind of cut their teeth, right? They just had the means, had the access for whatever reason, had this passion and dove in and figured things out. So you obviously fall into that bucket. But this is a huge left turn from fighter pilot in the Navy, so I can
Yes.
see your parents being like, what are you trying to tell us here? Um, so you go through uh, college, you get your degree, and then was it right out of there that you started working with Deloitte?
Yeah, so I went and worked at a fintech company in Boston first, and then I
Okay.
started working for Deloitte like shortly after. The fintech company in Boston wasn't so great. They weren't so techy as they were like financial focused. So I
Mm,
was like, this isn't really my thing. And then Deloitte was there, and I was just like, yeah, might as well, see what they've got to offer. My girlfriend at the time was working at uh, what's it called? Anderson Consulting, which then changed their name to Accenture right around the
right.
same time. Maybe like 6 months or 12 months later, they changed their name to Accenture.
Mm,
So in a theory, she was like an accountant there, but more like an accounting, I guess you could say consultant, I think you could say really is what she really
okay.
was. And I was like, wow, I really like that. And then, Deloitte reached out and I was like, yeah, this is a great opportunity. I can be, I could work at a company just like her. And, we'll, in a way we'll be competing, but we can compare notes later. Kind of,
Right.
I thought I had this grand vision that didn't really work out too well, let's just say.
So when you first joined Deloitte, what type of projects were you working on?
Basically like people that were trying to basically they saw the future too. Like everything was rolling into tech and most people didn't take tech very seriously at the time.
Mm,
And Deloitte was like, hey, we're jumping on board to make sure all these companies that are brick and mortar, that are doing their spreadsheets with like word processors, saving them to disks, saving them to like hard drives locally and stuff like that. They had their own servers in their own, like in their office spaces and things like that. We were taking people online and we basically optimize their ability to do business by bringing them into the internet space, building
mm,
websites for them, consulting in all sorts of fields. But at the end of the day, it was mostly there weren't too many tech projects I worked on when I worked there. It was I didn't really work there for very long. Straight up, like I probably maybe worked on 5 projects before I took another job. That was I moved over to a company called Sennheiser Electronic Corporation.
yeah. Yeah. I'm just looking there. So you were there for about a year, it looks like,
Yeah.
at Deloitte
Yep.
or less. And then you move over to Sennheiser
Yep.
as a senior, well, eventually senior marketing manager for North America. And even then, you were only there for a few years before you then went to
3 years. Yep.
another,
3 years. Yeah.
yeah, MySpace for a few years, another early, tech company that hit it big, the precursor to Facebook. So you were getting exposed to a lot of this early tech, the early 2000s when things were starting to boom. You have this interest in marketing. This must have really just been feeding into, wow, this is exactly what I envisioned. You weren't sitting on a beach in the Caribbean making websites for hotels, but
Not yet.
it was tech, it was marketing. Okay, not yet. So what happened?
So I went over to Sennheiser, got my while I was working at Sennheiser, got my master's degree, a couple master's degree, but my master's degree in computer science and then also online marketing. And I was going to school full time and working full time. So by the
Mm,
time I graduated, I got recruited out of grad school to work at a company called lowermybills.com at the time.
mm,
Now, it was like the number 5 tech company in all of the United States at this time. So they were basically a subprime lead gen company for refinancing people's houses and stuff like that. So if you ever heard of LendingTree did prime only, or sorry, excellent credit people. When banks compete, you win. Yeah, we were that way for subprime people. So like we were,
mm.
they didn't really need the leads that we were selling to people. I'm sure like led up to the financial crisis of like these people were getting like home loans and they had no way of like
Yes.
proving income and all sorts of stuff. Like,
Yeah.
so we were probably first started working there. 3 weeks after I started working there we had first $80,000 day. We were like big celebration, right? And then a
Mm,
year after I started working there, we celebrated first $1 million day. And
wow.
then every day after that, we were making around $1 million a day. And we got purchased by Experian and we became Experian Interactive right after that. So
Wow.
it was a pretty cool experience. That was my first startup I ever work at. Gets acquired for $380 million. Not a bad situation. I was the head of
Hmm.
I was a product manager there, head of strategy and analytics. And in that experience, when you work at a startup, you don't realize like how much startups actually, like when you're you're at a high performing company, and I was surrounded by, they were all A players. There was no B and C, was not tolerated there at all. So they were very performance driven, and if you didn't meet your numbers, and I'm talking everybody had analytics, they were basically performance analytics for every single person. Doesn't matter what kind of a job you had performance analytics tied to you. And if you didn't make those numbers, you were basically looked at in 30 days to 60 days, and then you were disappeared probably around the 90th day. And, there was a lot of people disappeared around lunch break. But anyway, it was a very high performing company. They didn't tolerate anybody working there that weren't doing their job perfectly. Now, I loved it. I myself thrived in that kind of environment. I was there for 3 years, but the average tenure was 11 months. And
Wow.
I remember one time we hired, when I was there about a year in, that we hired people that had a Harvard undergrad and Harvard MBA. We hired 10 of them, and 8 of them were gone in 60 days. Another one lasted maybe 9 or 10 months, and only one stayed at the company doing something completely different in the different category that was a lot less competitive, I guess you could say, than the space that I guess we were in. One actually went and opened a gelato store. So it's interesting to see surrounded by really high performing people, and all of a sudden you not knowing. I didn't know I was that high performing until you're surrounded by it. I think you're a
Right.
product of your environment. You either step up or they churn you out really quickly.
Right.
And, in an environment like that, everybody that left that business to take other jobs, they are all running the internet right now. Currently,
Yeah.
I'm one of my coworkers is a CMO at Match.com, and
Wow.
another one, is a head of a venture capital firm. There's so many people that left that, kind of like they say the PayPal mafia. Well, let me tell you, there's a lower my bills
Mm.
mafia out there that no one talks about, but they are all
Wow.
killers. Yeah, it's
Wow.
really
So
interesting.
you got exposed to this startup culture. You got exposed to this high performance culture. You got to see firsthand what it's like to
Yep.
build a successful company, what it takes, what it
Yep.
doesn't take. Yeah, even people with MBAs were not cutting it there. So you
Exactly.
obviously learned a lot from that. Is that what caused you to get the entrepreneurial bug yourself?
Yeah, it's I was working at Lower My Bills, and I was consulting for MySpace.com at the same time. I had some extra time. So I was in theory, I saw it from a bunch of different angles. I was part of basically the first real functioning social network, right? MySpace was the real one. Yes, there was Friendster and a couple other ones that were, that just didn't work out because their systems broke. MySpace was the first functioning one, and the first one that grew beyond belief. And I was able
Mm.
to see that one and be a part of that one selling as well. That sold to Fox when I was there, and we sold to Fox for $580 million. So it's all of a sudden there's two right in a row for me. And I was just well, that was pretty cool. Do all .com sell? That's what I started thinking of, what's going on here?
Mm.
It was right after that, I started to realize this is the space for me. I'm in the right space. There's hardly anybody that has expertise like I do. There's
Hmm.
a very few people that know the internet like I do. And I was being recruited left and right, from all companies, going, hey, come work for us, come work for us. I was being flown up to Seattle, looking at Amazon jobs. Microsoft was trying to hire me for their ad network at one time. Both times were around the same time period. And it's why is everybody trying to recruit me so hard? And it's because Lower My Bills sold for $380 million, right? So
Yeah.
everybody's huge success, and is also really, really profitable business. So I was man, there's no doubt I'm going to start my own company. I just don't know when, right? So then
Right.
I took a job at this company called Traffic Marketplace. Now this was the big win. This is the one that really opened the door for me. It was an ad network, and they brought me in as the senior director of media. And I was oh, this is unique. I'll check this out. Why not? I didn't know anything about. I knew about Adtech, but I didn't know as much as I would learn at basically Traffic Marketplace. So it was comes. I came into the company, And I realized it wasn't doing as well. And, it was like very, I can say it now because it's been so long, but it was like negative 19% EBIT at the time. And I was like, why are we not profitable right now? We used to be this very profitable ad network. And what we were doing was, I don't know if you guys know what an ad network is, but basically it's back then at least, there was a whole bunch of impressions that would come in from a bunch of websites. So we would make deals with like monster.com, Yahoo, MySpace. We were getting 1 billion with a B impressions from MySpace on a daily basis. And our job was to connect them with brands that want to work with these companies. So a brand would come to us and say, we want placement across 200 other websites, rather than them coming in and basically making individual deals with each one of these websites. They would come to us and say, hey, we want deals with all these websites. You handle all that stuff. And we were the software in between, was the ad network. So we would connect them all, and all these brands or all these publishers or websites would get ads run by our software from these brands. And that's how an ad network works. And so we were getting all these remnant, is what they call ad impressions, meaning unserviced ad impressions. So they weren't getting ads run on them. So we would then optimize those unserved ad impressions with our brand impressions across their websites. And I started to realize like there was a little bit of a flaw in their business model. And we were buying ad impressions, yet we weren't selling to those ad impressions. So one thing I learned in like business school, literally, I didn't really bring anything else with me from grad school or undergrad except for this, which was the first class I ever took in business, which was, basically just-in-time inventory management, basically a Japanese car manufacturing, inventory management system, so that when you buy a car, they don't have it on stock. They build it specifically for you to your specifications, so they don't also have inventory to worry about storing. So I thought of that and I go, why can't we just apply that method to ad impressions? Like, instead of buying the ad impressions, we make a deal with all these publishers and say, hey, when we need ad impressions from you, we will tell you. Otherwise, we're going to use you on our decks saying that we have partnerships with you guys, which we did. And then we'll only ask you for the impressions when we need it. And then you guys just turn on our ad impressions, and we will match you with brands so that you guys can make money from your remnant ad impressions. So that method turned the business around from negative 19% EBIT to 30% in 60 days. So I was able to turn the entire business around. It went from number 12 privately held ad network to number 2. And we sold the company for $580 million. So it was pretty cool. Another like sell. It's like crazy timing.
I see a pattern here.
Yeah. So right after that, I started consulting after that company, and one of my gigs for consulting, somebody wanted me to help them with their business in the Caribbean.
Okay,
so
here we go.
I was
Full
like,
circle.
wait a minute, what's going on here? How is this happening? So there's a company in Canada. It was in Newfoundland, actually, to be exact.
Wow.
And flew out to Newfie, stayed there for like a couple of weeks to get see what they were doing. It was an ad tech company. And they're like, yeah, we moved offshore to St. Thomas. And it's better for taxes and this and that. I'm like, oh, cool. And we want you to run our ad network in the Caribbean. I was like, okay. So flew out to St. Thomas, and I loved it at first. I was like, this is great. What an amazing opportunity. It was, obviously very well paid in the Caribbean. And I mean, let's be honest, like, this was basically, like you said, coming full circle. I was fulfilling this promise in a way I made my mother back in like 98 or something like that. And obviously they thought I was crazy, yet guess what? It's 2008, 10 years later, there I am in the Caribbean making, LA money on an island. So it was let's just say it was very lucrative, very, very, the downside about the Caribbean is you don't realize that when you vacation somewhere, it's not exactly the same as living there. And I got sick of that place within 3 weeks. I was like, get me off this island.
Yeah.
So
Just a crazy story, though. I mean, like, just to back up for a second, anybody who listens to this podcast or reads the newsletter, they would recognize the first, several years of your story as you're setting the stage for this. You're
Yeah,
out there increasing your luck surface area,
very true.
trying different jobs, working at different startups, soaking up all the different skills and experiences you can, meeting different people, getting connected. And then suddenly, out of the blue, this opportunity lands in your lap for you to fulfill this prophecy, this promise you made about, I'm going to work in the Caribbean making websites for hotels. Like, how incredible of a story is that that's exactly how it happened, but you didn't take a direct path to get there. You did all this other stuff which led this opportunity to you. That's a happy accident, my friend, and I just love stories like that.
Yeah,
So,
I can't believe it myself. Obviously I wasn't making websites. I was doing something I loved though,
right.
like ad tech stuff. Like at this point, I was 100% into what I was doing for my career. I was very happy with where it took me. I actually thought being a website developer was very short-sighted at this point because anybody can make a
Mm,
website, and like
right.
hardly anybody knows what like ad tech is. So yeah, I
Yeah.
got really lucky, and there's no doubt this was absolutely this would never have happened if I didn't increase that luck surface area, right? There's just
Mm,
no way. I took gigs that honestly, I took jobs that I probably thought at the time I was no way qualified for. In theory, there is no way I was qualified for taking that ad tech job the first time
mm,
at that company at Traffic Marketplace. I wasn't qualified for it, but I took it. I lived, eat, and breathed the job for the first 3, 4 months. And by the time the third or fourth month came around, I was like, wow, I can't believe, every time I take these risks of like taking a job I don't feel like I'm qualified for, I just step up and own it. And when you do that, you figure it out along the way.
yeah. Because a lot of people obviously would have some sort of imposter syndrome or anxiety or fear.
Yeah,
Uh-oh, I can't take that. I'm not qualified. Or if I do take it, I'm going to get found out that I'm not the person they think I am. Whereas you saw it as an opportunity, right?
I did.
Yes, yes,
I did have imposter syndrome too. Let's be honest. Like when I
right.
first, and I can tell you a really interesting story here just for 2 seconds to go back. When I first came to LA, I mean, I knew nobody here. In the first 2 weeks of my first job at lowermybills.com, I called my mother twice in 2 weeks,
Mm,
crying to her, telling her word for word, they're gonna find out I'm an imposter, that I can't do this job, and I'll be
mm,
home soon. Watch, I'll be back in Connecticut before you know it. And she was the one that was like, no, you got this. You can do this. Don't worry about it. They're not gonna find this out. You're a great person, blah, blah, blah. And I can tell you,
mm.
it's everybody feels imposter syndrome. Like it's just
Yeah,
part of the deal. You just got to
right.
do it scared sometimes. Do it
Yeah.
scared.
Just do it scared. I love that. And that obviously it's worked out for you. So you and I have chatted before this podcast. You've
Sure have.
shared with me you've had a couple of different happy accidents along your career. We just kind of touched on one. Uh, all of a sudden, you get this opportunity to work in the Caribbean. Not exactly what you had envisioned, and it didn't quite work out the way you had hoped. But tell us about some other unexpected opportunities that have come your way throughout your career.
Sure. I mean, I could skip over a couple of like Fortune 500 companies if you want, but let's just say I remember I was working at a company, a social media company, a social commerce company for musicians at the time. And basically, I ramped up the business really, really quickly from 40,000 members to 480,000 members in like 11 months. And they weren't expecting to be profitable. And, I don't think I was even expecting the amazing results of the flywheel I created. So after that job, we were basically set, we sold the company to somebody, a company in Austin, which I can't really talk about, but it, it kind of left me open to like, hey, I gotta get another job after this one, because this company just sold and, new owners are coming in and they don't need the team anymore. And I'm one of the people that's involved. So I gotta find a new gig. So I started my own company. In the meantime, I had like 3 month window of working for that company still kind of like on autopilot because they told me just like, hey, just look for a new gig, whatever you need to do, because you guys, killed it for us. You guys can just hang out here, come to work and do whatever you want. So I started a business, and that business, like, I was like wondering, how am I going to get leads? So it was a social media management business. Basically, we would run ads and manage people's social media for them across a bunch of companies with software I developed at the time called Promotionalize It. Anyway, it created flywheels for people very quickly, which reduced costs and increased people's memberships to their websites. So while I was doing that, I kind of started an event, because I was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to start a tech event. I know a lot of people in Los Angeles. I'm going to start these events, and then these events will be a lead gen for our social media business, and just start kicking us back all these companies, and we'll just have free events every single month. The more we do them, the more people will show up. And I'm like, I didn't think it was going to be anything, right? And
That was the purpose, right? Really, just let me find another way to create more leads
exactly.
for this other business. That was
Yeah,
the only
and
goal.
that's my entire career, is literally, people say there's no shortcuts and there's no hacks. I am the king of shortcuts and hacks. Like, I actually want to find those. Everybody says they don't exist, and they definitely exist. You just got to find them by looking in the right places. And that is what I've literally based my entire career on. So I'm like, hey, the fastest way to become an authority in this space and get leads is by having events. You have these tech events, and people start, tying you to a local tech event. It then drives real leads to you. And then you get to, like, people sign up with their first name, last name, email address. Now you have all these people signing up, right? And it worked out really great for me. At first I was just like, okay, these are great leads. But then all of a sudden my events, I'm thinking just leads, but my events started to, like, go a little haywire. And I was like, the first event, 80 people showed up. The second event, 120 people showed up. No big deal. The third event, like 300 people showed up. And I was like, that's weird. Probably just an outlier, not a big deal. There's a lot of people. Holy cow, we got a lot of leads to go through here. The next event, 600 people showed up. The next event, 1,200 people RSVP'd to a tech event at a bar. And I was like, wait a minute, like, that's more people than these people that this bar sees in a week. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, what's going on here? Every single month, the number just kept doubling and doubling and doubling. And I was just like, wait a minute, there's something happening here event wise. There's a business here. Like, because again, when people sign up, that's a demand gauge for me. And it's like, wait, what can I do with this? Like, people are signing up, but they don't all need social media management or marketing help or email help or any of these things. I'm like, something's going on, and I need to take advantage of this momentum, because, I always say, there's a quote I like to say, is never turn your back on momentum, because it's really hard to get. It's like catching fire and lightning in a bottle, basically. And it's like, wait, something's happening here. People would kill for this that actually have events. And they're just like flying to my events, and I don't know what it is, but I'm going to go with it. So I started thinking of, like, a business model for events. I didn't come up with it right away, but what I did do is I took a cue from Facebook. We don't know what we have yet, is what they used to say. So we're not going to put ads here. We're not going to do anything. We're just going to keep doing what we're doing to see what this actually can become. So I was like, all my friends are like, you need to start charging for tickets. You need to start doing this. You need to get in sponsors. And I'm like, okay, I think I can get in sponsors. And then literally the next day I get a phone call from a friend of mine. They're like, hey, are you part of these events? And my friend works at Google. And I'm like, yeah, like, I am. Those are actually my events. They're like, oh, okay, we want to sponsor you. I was like, oh, okay, sure, you can sponsor with the events. They're like, no, how do we sponsor for the year? Can we sponsor for the year? I'm like, sure. And Google became a sponsor to my events out of nowhere. And I was just like, that is that is unbelievable happy accident, because there's no way I would have ever reached out to her, who worked at Google. I never thought Google as a sponsorship would be a thing. She reached out to me and started asking questions. And I was just like, yeah. And it turned into 7 years or 8 years of Google sponsoring my events. And then, I don't know, I'm sure you know this, but when you get a big sponsor in, there's a whole bunch of other sponsors that are interested all of a sudden, right? It's kind of like venture capital, where one venture capitalist comes in and is like, here's a bunch of money. And all of a sudden now all these other venture capitalists want to be like take
Yeah.
part, right? It's like, oh
Yeah.
wow, we got to get in there too. And yeah, we went through so many sponsors. So like the events became profitable because I mean, they didn't really, there was no overhead. It just, I showed up to an event and I had like a volunteer check people in, and that was it. Like there was really no, there was no, there was no overhead
Wow.
basically.
So at the height, how many people were attending these events?
Well, the cool part is so it was at least, I mean, I'm still, just so you know, like I started hosting events again in January of 2023, and I'm still doing them right now. But
Hmm.
so at its pinnacle I mean, it's still all the way up until I exited in December of 2019, it was 400 to 500 people every single month paying for tickets. But what happened was these free events led up to a paid event, or what I call a freemium event, which
Hmm.
was Disrupt LA in 2014. So I launched the events in December of 2012, and that led up to having a summit called Disrupt LA. And I worked with actually TechCrunch Disrupt to do Disrupt LA, and signed a contract with them. And we did Disrupt LA in May 8th and 9th of 2014. And we had 110 speakers and 2,400 people came to the event,
Wow.
all from a happy accident of just starting an event, trying to create leads for our business. Uh,
Yeah. I love
Never
it.
would have expected it. Turned into
I
a
love it.
9-year journey, and it, stopped doing it December 2019. And I had no idea there was a pandemic, guys. I got lucky exiting in December of 2019.
I was going to say that's
3 months
pretty
later,
fortuitous timing right there. December 2019, you get out of the physical event
it's crazy
space
timing. Yeah, didn't
right
know,
before the pandemic.
had no idea, of
Yeah.
course.
Wow. That's just an incredible story. I mean, from start to finish, let's do this thing on the side just to create leads for our other thing. And then this side thing turns into this massive event business where you get sponsors like Google. It turns into this paid event thing where you're partnering with like TechCrunch, and you exit right before the pandemic hits. Like that is the
Super
most,
lucky.
yeah, I love it. Um, so that's the happy accident, right? We've gone
that's
through
that's a big
here,
one.
here
Yeah,
yeah,
that's what,
here's
and that was a solopreneur business. Like I literally built
yeah,
that from the ground up myself. I was the one guy, and I can tell you right now, it was a 99% profit business. So it was just like all of it, like there was like almost no overhead at all. Like I,
well,
make a couple signs here and there. I was able to expand that business outside of just, LA. I went to like 23 different cities, and eventually, yeah, exited the company. So yeah,
yeah.
it was interesting. It's all about
So
building systems. Is
yeah,
how I was able to do it. Before systems
yeah,
was a cool thing to talk about, and processes. I had a system and process built in
yeah,
like 2014. So
right. And obviously a ton of this learning on how to do these things was from this incredible background you had working at all these different startup companies, seeing how to grow, seeing how to exit, seeing
yeah,
what's important, uh, working as an A player surrounded by other A players. You were setting the stage for these things to come your way. You then
yeah,
see these happy accidents, or see these opportunities that turn into happy accidents. But I'm assuming you've had a ton of different opportunities land in your lap, and I'm assuming you've been selective about which ones you say yes to and which ones you've turned down. Do you have a way of kind of evaluating this looks like a good opportunity for me to dive into, and this one looks like one I should pass on?
I want to say that I'm a genius with this. I want to be like, yeah, man, I got this process down. I've taken a lot of flyers, I guess you could say.
Mm,
I've definitely taken consulting jobs here and there that were absolute nightmares. So
mm,
what I've done is realize that when you start a job working for somebody else, all I would recommend, the opportunity will kind of like overwhelm you unless you take it as a consultant first. Take it as a contract job first and see how the culture actually fits you. And
mm,
if it fits, cool, but you can also determine whether or not something's toxic. And there's a
right,
lot of stuff out there that looks like, oh my God, this is a great business. And then once you get on the inside and, you start
right.
kicking the tires and looking at the numbers, specifically the finances of the business. And there were a couple of companies I was a consultant for that wanted me to be full time, but I wasn't right away. And I can tell you, I'm glad I didn't become that because, 2 months, 3 months in, of me consulting for them, they were running out of money. So
Yeah.
they don't tell you that up front. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of, there's a lot of misses, but the best way to evaluate any kind of opportunity is risk versus, in theory, it's risk versus reward here, right? Like,
Right.
do you need the money? What's the worst, like, what's the worst case scenario, right? What is the CEO is a complete crazy person that
Mm-hmm.
thinks, something's possible. What is the worst case scenario of that, right? And is it going to take you off your career path? Is it going to take you off your trajectory of what you want 5, 10 years from now? Most people don't think 5, 10 years from now. We are very rare people that do. So just know
Mm.
that even the smartest of tech, of business people, of finance people, any of this stuff, none of them really have this stuff planned out. They just take opportunities as they come and they lament and think about it. But, sometimes you
Right.
just got to take a risk. I think the
Yeah.
risks were worth it though.
Yeah.
So,
But I like your advice about finding ways to test those out first. If it's a new company, come in as maybe a part-time consultant first so you can really
yep.
test out the waters. If it's a new business idea, how do I test it small first before going all in on something that may or may not actually be as great an opportunity as it looks? But if you can find a way to test it and evaluate it, how does this fit in the long-term scheme of things for me? It sounds like great advice to me.
Yeah. Not every good idea is a business and not every business is a good idea.
Yeah,
So I can
love it.
tell you,
Love
I
it.
have a lot of ideas and none of them are businesses. So,
Yeah. So that's a great quote. That's a good segue because there's a couple other quotes I have that
ah,
are meaningful to you. The first one you've given me, this is a quote that you enjoy. Be courteous to all and intimate with few, and let those few be well tried before you give them your trust. Who's this
I
quote
love that
by? And
one.
yeah,
George
and
Washington, and I've memorized it just because it's such a prolific piece to me where, to trust people is a gift, right? It's a gift to them. And for you to give that gift freely and so openly is a really bad idea
mm,
because a lot of people, there's usually around like three types of people. I shouldn't say there's two. There's three types of people. There's people that are friends with you and you know what I mean, like they do it for a transactional purpose and ideas, because they're not very good at idea iteration, and they want to take from you. And then there's other people that are supposedly your friends, and a lot of those people don't want what's best for you. They're trying to find a way to kind of like see you downfall in a way. And then there's a
mm,
third type, which is your friends. And you have to put a lot of time into people these days in order to find good friends. They are literally a four-leaf clover amongst like piles and piles of grass. So just know that, you know what I mean? Like before you trust people, put them to the test for a while. People can
yeah,
wear masks and you just don't know who they are unless
yeah,
the only thing that shows you who they are is time on fish, I guess you could say. You know what I mean? Like you're never going to know how to fish. So you have a lot of time fishing. So,
yeah. Like it. I also like how it starts like be courteous to all. It's not like
yep.
saying, "Hey, I'm
Yeah,
just gonna
don't be
ignore
mean.
everybody else." Right.
Exactly. You don't have to be
How,
mean. You just don't be open to everybody. Like don't be an open book.
yeah. How many people would you say are in your inner trusted circle?
4.
Yeah. And those are the four people that you trust implicitly and they've built that trust over time, back
Oh
and
yeah.
forth. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
There's one. I was just talking to one this morning, and I've known him since 2008. So like
Mm,
a lot of people though have come and gone, my friend. Like a lot of people, just life gets away from them. Like
yeah.
kids, wife, parents, all that stuff, moving around. Like job changes, life changes. All sorts of stuff. So
Yeah.
to have those good close friends that stay in contact are just a treasure. So just know that,
Yeah.
hold on to those and treasure them, and they don't all have to be business related. Like they
Yeah.
actually shouldn't be always. So
Yeah. And I guess if you want to attract those types of people, you got to be that type of person yourself as well, right? It's a two-way street. So,
yeah, I couldn't agree more with that one for sure.
yeah.
You have to be a really great friend back. It
Yeah.
can't just work one way.
So the other quote you gave me, show up where you don't belong because one day you will.
You know, that goes
Who's
back to imposter syndrome. So I made that quote up a long time ago,
This is
and
a Lucas Bean original.
it is. It's just like that business quote there before. This one is deep for me because there are many times, and I think most people feel this way. Most people don't feel like they belong somewhere, which is an imposter syndrome thing, right? It is everybody's looking at me spotlight effect. And hey, not only that, it's that I don't belong here and I haven't earned my spot. So I used to tell myself this quote, show up where you don't belong because one day you will. And the first day I went to soccer practice when I was a kid, I was like, oh my God, I don't belong here. All these guys are great at soccer. And a couple of weeks later, I was part of the team and everybody loved me. Same thing with going to school for the first time when I was a kid. I remember very well. I'm like, I have no friends. What am I going to do? Same thing with high school. You show up where you don't belong, and like you eventually realize you do belong. It's not because everybody else thinks you don't belong. It's that usually you are the one who
Mm,
thinks you're an outsider until you feel like you're not. And
yeah, I love that.
it pertains to business specifically. And show up to places that you don't feel like you can do something as a job, and learn that job. Be so good at it that you start to feel like, hey, I do belong here. I can do this job. I am an A player. I can be on a panel with other experts. I can give a TED talk. I can
Yeah,
do these things that scare the shit out of me. I can start a podcast, right? I can have a happy
yeah,
accident.
yeah. There you go. So this brings us to where you are now. Talk to me about your latest venture and how did this come about?
Yeah, so Social Proof is an influence ad network. So in theory, it's kind of in my wheelhouse for like the last 14, 15 years. And all it really is an ad network, just instead of having websites as publishers, it's people. And those people have a certain amount of reach across social media. And we leverage that reach with brands. Brands want that reach and they want to build trust quickly or quicker than
Mm,
they could by themselves. That's by renting reach or renting trust from influencers. And of
mm,
course, we work with Fortune 5,000 brands right now. So basically, we use AI to make sure that there's brand safety amongst the creators, so they don't have any, let's just say, litigious type of content that they might post, or
gotcha.
cancelable content. And then
Hmm.
after that, we basically just get brand deals and make sure they match with the influencer and make sure that we get them out there
Right,
across their profiles.
right. And then the influencer is just posting about these brands on their different social media channels.
Yeah, it's a little more in depth than that. Like they basically create content specifically for the brands, and then
Gotcha.
depending on the campaigns, we then amplify that brand message with some ad dollars that then basically pumps that ad out or that post
Gotcha.
out to a lot of people. Yeah.
Gotcha. Love it. Obviously, a great intersection of your experience, your skills, your passions. It sounds like a perfect fit. So, Lucas,
Sure.
love your story. And from aspiring fighter pilot to, going to business school for marketing, consulting, early, stage tech companies around the 2000 boom. You were involved in so many different startups that had big exits, brought all this different experience and some amazing happy accidents along the way. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Where can people connect with you?
lucasbean.com, or lucasbean on LinkedIn, or luke360 on Instagram and Twitter. Reach
Perfect.
out.
Well,
DMs are open.
yeah. Well, we'll put those links in the show notes. Lucas, thanks again, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dennis.
Hey, thanks for tuning into the Happy Accidents podcast. I hope you find these stories as intriguing and insightful as I do. But make sure you don't miss an episode. You can subscribe to my Accidental Solopreneur channel on YouTube and watch these episodes in video form, or subscribe to the Happy Accidents podcast on Apple and Spotify for your listening pleasure. Until next time, stay lucky, my friends.